Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global's Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by two very special guests, Nik Sharma and Austin Rief. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
Excited to be here, Erik. Thanks for having us.
So by way of introduction, Nik, why don't you start and introduce yourself and your expertise, and then you can talk about why you're excited to have Austin join as well, and we'll have Austin introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm Nik. I run a company called Sharma Brands. We're basically a consultancy for brands that are either in the direct-to-consumer space / e-commerce space, or for brands that aspire to be. So whether they are large Fortune 100 brands looking to DTC-ify their current brands, which might be like ancient brick and mortar, or just some old brands that have been around for too long, or working with brands like Judy or House or Brightland or a whole slew of other direct-to-consumer brands that are hot and upcoming. And we help them with all things strategy, growth, consumer insights, distribution, in some cases like helping them with supply chain and operations. But in most cases, we try to focus on the distribution side. And that's actually my background. Prior to this, I was at Hintwater and spent 2 years there building their direct-to-consumer business. That's actually where I met Austin, because I was an early advertiser on Morning Brew. And I wanted to bring Austin on mainly because every time I think I talk to Austin, I feel like I learned something new. We're friends in real life, but I feel like he's also like somebody I look up to in the business world. So yeah, I thought Austin would be a great addition to this podcast and to your audience.
Yeah, that's a big compliment, Nik. So Nik's right. We did meet. It must have been three and a half years now ago, at least. I started Morning Brew in 2015, and the basic idea is we're trying to make the business world more engaging and accessible for modern business leaders. So we're most well known for our daily email newsletter, sent out 6 days a week, right around 3 million subscribers, and we're getting well over 1 million daily opens. And recently, we've launched a bunch of new products in two different areas. Either one, making people smarter or better at their job. So we have Retail Brew, targeting retail professionals, Marketing Brew, targeting marketing professionals, and Emerging Tech Brew, same thing. And then on the other side, we started to create and dabble with different types of content, whether it be audio in our podcast or video content that takes business news, but also other topics people care about, our readers care about, and creating content they can engage with. So that's Morning Brew.
Awesome. Nik, I want to start by asking you, what is your sort of D2C investment thesis, and how that has evolved over time? And the biggest question people often have is, or VCs often have, is, hey, how do I tell this brand of clothes or sneakers or whatever from another? Like, what is really determines whether a brand is going to pop, or what makes a brand defensible versus not? Why don't you take a stab at some of these questions?
Yeah, I mean, when I started investing, which was probably 2 years ago, my thesis was basically, is this a brand where if it starts to go downhill, could I almost jump in and help save it from a marketing and sales standpoint? And if the answer was yes, then I would, say it's pretty much good to go. I would say now it's probably evolved to, if there's a brand that has a really clear moat around something, whether it be a owned audience, through something they own, like there's a skincare brand launching this week that I invested in that, has built a following through their owned and operated blog for, a handful of years. So that's one example. Or through having somebody on board, like, a large celebrity, or, whether they're an investor, a co-founder, kind of like how Onda has Shay Mitchell or Maud has Dakota Johnson. So that's one example of a moat. Another example of a moat is like Austin and I are invested in a men's skincare brand together called Black Wolf Nation. And, an example of their moat is they own their own fulfillment center. So they never pay fulfillment costs or, a cent more than what they should be paying when it comes to things like shipping and boxing and picking and packing. And so basically I try to look at like, where is there a moat that somebody else could not, if somebody went to the same manufacturer, They've spent $100,000 building a brand. Like, where could they still not win? And why is it so obvious that these guys are going to win over their competitor? And for me, I tend to write checks pretty early, sometimes pre-product or pre-brand. And so for me, it's always relying on, what is that one thing that's going to make sure that they get to that next level or get carried through to their, Series A or that level of success.
Austin, how do you look at investing in D2C brands and e-commerce companies more broadly?
Yeah, so through my fund, I don't invest in many direct-to-consumer businesses. I just don't know it that well, and I think of them similar to media companies where it's tough to get venture returns there. It's possible, and someone actually recently, I'm sure you know who it was, wrote this great blog post that broke down that you can, return a fund and have a successful VC fund. But for me, I like to think more about what are the e-commerce enablement brands, the brands that are helping those businesses succeed and figuring out what their moat is and how they have a defensible strategy. I know one that I believe Nik and I are both invested in is a business called Co-op. Nik can explain what they do much better than I do, but they're crushing it, and they are helping direct consumer businesses acquire new customers. Which in a world in where that's everything, as Nik was talking about before, distribution's everything. And so if you have a business that can help companies get distribution, that's huge. So that's an area I invest in, but Nik obviously knows the space much better than I do.
Nik, where from an e-commerce enablement perspective are you most excited about?
Probably two places. One is distribution. So that one Austin mentioned, Co-op Commerce, is a great example of that. They help brands basically, for example, Erik, if you purchase a pack of Brightland oil, on the checkout screen after you've purchased, you will first see a post-purchase survey to understand where you came from, and then you'll see probably an ad for something like Caraway pans or the Beverage House. And it's basically the concept of, somebody's already done the work to bring somebody to that screen and gotten them to convert. So why can't we, see if we can stretch that customer and also bring them to a like-minded brand where there is evidence that they share, a very similar type of customer persona. So that's one. And then the second one that I'm really excited about is probably on the financial side. So, you see companies like Clearbank or Brex, they've done a tremendous job of getting more access to or making access to capital a lot easier. And then there's a lot of companies that have followed on with the stuff they've done. So whether it's, Shopify Capital or something similar to that. So that's another place that I'm really excited in. I invested in a company called Settle, which almost does the pretty much the same thing with their next few launches. But, it started as basically a cash flow management tool. And I actually started as a customer and then realized that this could be huge and decided to get further involved. But for me, it's really on the side of capital, like making it easy for somebody to go ahead and do it, or also even for some fast growing brands who just need better management of cash flow or better payment terms on whether it's POs that are incoming that they need paid faster or, checks outgoing that need to be delayed. And then also on the distribution side where, as Austin mentioned, it's basically, it's a fight to acquire that same customer. And so another great company that I joined was The Fascination. And their whole job is, they're basically creating a premium publisher on the internet where they're acting both as a very sophisticated publisher in terms of putting out great content, but they're also bringing commerce into it. So if you're moving to California or actually if you're moving to Miami, you might try to understand, what are the 10 things you need to get when you get there, right? Is it a Judy kit because you don't know about the hurricanes that are about to hit you? Is it an 8-sleep mattress? Is it a Buffy comforter? Like basically The Fascination does a great job of, it's almost like the infatuation for commerce, right? They take these real reviews, not paid for reviews. They bring them in. And then their goal is, if somebody's moving to Miami, for example, can we put together a cart with, the 10 different things they need from their pots and pans to their bed sheets and then take a cut of that. But, basically almost like an affiliate platform, but with a much more premium feel.
You can imagine just a, infatuation or fascination, for X, almost like a roll up, business that helps incubate these or creates these. Does that exist?
It's a good question. Maybe Morning Brew's B2B side will have something for that.
No, but I do think what they're doing is interesting. I've heard about them, and I'm curious if like they're going to collect so much data on these consumer brands. They're up funnel, like upstream from purchase behavior, but they're pretty close to it. I'm curious if their plans ultimately to launch their own brands or invest in some of these brands. But I think it's an interesting space. I don't know like how intriguing strictly affiliate is unless you get huge, right? Like if you're like a Credit Karma, that's obviously a great business in the right space. But that position of leverage being upstream from a purchase decision can be really valuable.
I want to talk about the ways in which this broader space has evolved. Nik, you've been doing it for some time. I mean, one of them is sort of the intersection, given we have Austin, it's appropriate, between content and commerce. One, you talk about how that's evolved, then we talk about how sort of investing in the broader space has evolved over time.
Yeah. Well, actually, Austin, do you want to take a first swing at it since you're Mr. Content?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the most exciting spaces out there. I think most media companies are struggling because they're, number one, they have bad cap tables, right? So a lot of these companies that people talk about, they're actually not bad businesses. They just have bad cap tables that are underwater, and they're trying to figure out ways to get around it. And ultimately, when you raise, like you're a fast growing SaaS business, you're actually a media company that's growing 20% a year with decent or potentially decent margins. It's been tough, but I think what media companies are starting to do in commerce is really interesting. I wish a lot of them went further into it, but the classic example is Barstool. They build these great brands on social. They monetize those brands, and I think the best example of a Barstool's done really well is with Pink Whitney. So there's this podcast. I'm not a hockey fan, but I think it's the biggest hockey podcast out there. Two former NHL players talking about hockey. They built up a brand. They did an ad read for New Amsterdam vodka. It went, and the ad read, because they're building up personalities, because people actually care what these people say. I think the ad read was basically like, I drink pink lemonade with my vodka. And the ad read went well, and people started tweeting about it. It built a little mini franchise. And next thing you know, they do a partnership with New Amsterdam where they're selling pink vodka. And I think that's what's so exciting is using media as a top of funnel for something that is not just ads. I think ads is part of the way you get there. But I think it's whether it's as a company, selling commerce, or whether it's, like the Hustle has their Hustle Trends, or whether it's like an individual using their media and their Twitter as top of funnel for a fund. I think it's all a similar idea, which is distribution is so incredibly important, but there are better ways to monetize it than just subscription and ad revenue. And maybe I know I'm a little controversial when I say it, but everyone talks about subscriptions are like the ultimate way to monetize. And I think like, $100 subscription on Substack, like that's fine. But I think ultimately most creators are going to find that, $100 subscription is not the optimal way. I think you can go way higher dollar and sell something of more value to your customers.
Let's go deeper there. Say more about how other monetization opportunities are emerging and what they could look like, or what they do look like and what they could look like.
Yeah, I mean, so we can, you can go through it for a individual creator, but you have someone like Webb Smith who he has the full stack, right? So he's really executing this at scale for an individual. So he has his newsletter, which I believe he has ads, and some days I'm not positive. He has a subscription, but then he also has a $1,200 a year membership. And it's like, it's the 100 true fans versus 1,000 true fans. So, it's $1,200 a year. So it's high investment, and he's providing true community and value for these people. And I think he also does investments as a fund as well. So he's really doing the full stack. So from a company, from an individual perspective, he's really, I think he's doing well. I think
is a great simplification here that many content companies should be experimenting with commerce, and a bunch of D2C and commerce companies should be creating great content. That all of these should be sort of fused together.
So I think it's really hard to create content as a commerce business. I actually think it's easier to create, depending on what the product is, of course, create a product, some physical product as a media brand than vice versa. With that being said, when you start talking about SaaS businesses, obviously, the equation changes. And that's why I've been tweeting about this for years now. Like SaaS businesses should start to roll up media companies, and they have. So MakerPad just recently got acquired by, I think it was Zapier.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And The Hustle got bought by HubSpot. And it makes so much sense from it's such a positive sum gain. Number one, there's multiple arbitrage where it's like SaaS businesses are trading their 30 times ARR dollars for media companies that are happy to sell at 4 times revenue. So it's basically like it's arbitrage. It's like a free acquisition. And two, they have that audience. But as someone who went through this and had some of these conversations and has these conversations, it is easier said than done for these things to happen, for these deals to get done. But on the other hand, there also aren't that many brands to buy. So if you're a SaaS business, I think it makes total sense to buy a brand. But as each one gets bought, there aren't that many brands where the audience truly gives a shit about what they say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. I mean, so people often comment on how, sort of how the internet has led to sort of this great barbell where what happened to retail stores is that they got stuck in the middle because, Alex Danko has a series of posts where it's like, or purchase behavior is either the exact thing that I want, this like hyper niche, hyper customized, specialized sort of product, or it's sort of, whatever the aggregator is. It's sort of, Amazon. It's just like cheapest, most convenient, I just go to that one place for everything else, or it's the exact thing that what I want. And retail stores kind of got caught in the middle of being neither of those two. I'm curious if you'd, edit the characterization of that phenomenon. And I also wonder if sort of, most media sites are also basically like the retail stores, or at least sort of legacy media sites that they're not like hyper specialized, hyper customized. And we have many emerging, many blogs, many Substacks, et cetera. And then we have, sort of Facebook but we don't, most legacy, and maybe New York Times in that too, I don't know, but most legacy media sites are sort of caught in the middle. Any reactions?
100%. That's where these companies got in trouble 5 years ago, is they thought they were Facebook and they were going to have that distribution, and they don't. And at the end of the day, no matter how many page views you get, Facebook has more. No matter how many views you get, video views you get, YouTube has more. And so I think the definition of scale in media is Facebook, Google, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, and then if it's not distribution, it's got to be the best content in the world. Like it has to be unbelievable. And like, I don't even know who you put in that bucket, right? Like you probably put like Disney, right? And Disney's trying to flex both. And that's why Disney can be incredibly powerful. But yeah, if you're not, best, it doesn't need to be best content in the world for every person. It needs to be best content in the world for your demographic or your psychographic. So like Ben Thompson, right? Best in the world for the people who read that, other people. But yeah, way too many people try to be all things to all people, and then you're nothing to nobody.
Yeah. And I know also you think a lot about sort of media in the broader sense in terms of where we've been and where we're going. Why don't you help, contextualize it by adding any thoughts on either the history or the future that we haven't yet covered? What would you add or help contextualize this conversation?
The future is going to be really interesting, right? There's going to have to be new models for success, because what's happening right now isn't working. And so we will see, right? Something's gonna have to change. Either journalism or media is gonna have to be, again, like we said, top of funnel for other things that are higher dollar, or what I think is gonna I think it's we're gonna have to go super long tail. And that's why I think Substack ultimately is gonna build something really interesting. It's because Substack, to me's ultimate manifestation is not poaching, all these journalists. To me, it's about creating 1 million new content creators who write for their small niche. And when I say Substack, that could be Twitter now with review. What they're doing is really interesting because they own distribution. So I actually think that's fascinating. But no matter who it is, the idea of creating content for the long tail, but that only makes sense if your cost structure is essentially zero. So if you start to build up a media company, it changes. But yeah, I think there'll be interesting models. And then of course, like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, they're going to succeed because the paper of record, they have the brand. Everyone else is just scrambling to figure their shit out, and we'll see what happens. Nik, I feel like direct to consumer, like the commerce space is similar, no?
Yeah, very similar. There's brands that, like you said, they either have something that makes them win, but in most cases, brands are really good at one thing, whether that's really honing in on a certain demographic that they have, pretty well grasped, or that's really it. Like it's really a game of audience in the direct to consumer world, right? When you find your first 10,000, 50,000 customers, that's kind of what establishes you. And then you start to grow different arms and legs from there. Hint's a great example where they were primarily a beverage brand, and then they started to expand the beverage line, and then they started to understand, okay, there's one thing of DNA in every product that we put out, which is basically we remove the shitty ingredients and we add, really rich, flavorful fruit essences. And then they said, okay, now how do we go tackle, if we have a brand that we can leverage, we have something we're known for, which is the fruit. How do we go find other white spaces in the market where we can go in, take the shit out, put the fruit in, and jump on the shelf? And so it started with sunscreen and, deodorant, and it's moving towards, a ton of other things like chapstick and other personal care products. But it's very similar in the sense that you've got to dominate one segment first, right? And then you can go and play the other segments. I mean, even if you look at like from an example that a lot of people would know is like Gary V, right? Gary started with marketing content and social media, and then now he talks about everything under the sun, right? Like wine and sports cars, whatever. But it started with kind of building those, for him, it was probably like 1 million super fans around marketing, and then starting to then dabble and say, okay, what are the other, 7 things I could talk about? And it works the exact same way in commerce as well. I mean, I've even learned it by, I started a newsletter a couple months ago, kind of as a joke. And then I realized, oh, wow, I could pull, pretty high open rates and a ton of people reading this every week. But it's when you look at the analytics, it's very specific to the content. So if the content is really dialed in, right, starting with like the subject line all the way down to the end, then the open rates overall tend to be really high. And when it's not as dialed in, the open rate falls because, there's obviously some effect of people telling other people to read it or forwarding and whatnot. But yeah, I would say commerce and content go pretty hand in hand in terms of like trends and how they interact.
Yeah. And Nik, you've been, thinking and experimenting and active in sort of figuring out distribution for a long time on behalf of clients and investments and other people you've worked with. How has that evolved over time, and where are we right now and going forward in figuring out how to do distribution for companies?
Well, I mean, when a few years ago it was all about like, let's play between this bubble of Facebook ads and generating cash, and there was almost no attention paid to retail in stores. There was no attention to e-retail, which is basically, Target.com, Walmart.com. There was no attention paid to Amazon in terms of like, should we be listing on Amazon, getting on Amazon, or other marketplaces like Verishop or, some of these other marketplaces that have come up recently. Now it's all about like, where can we get for free, right? Or where can we put our brand, knowing that at the end of the day, we're still making money for every unit sold, and who has the connects to get everywhere, without it costing us an arm and a leg or taking forever. And then also, of course, the holy grail on top of that is somehow having a pre-existing owned audience that is interested in what you're building because you have some kind of information, that shows that. So, if you're a celebrity who's known for like, YouTube and now you're selling tequila, it's probably not going to work, right? But if you're a celebrity or if you're a YouTuber, who's known for cooking and you're selling caraway pots and pans, that's probably something that's going to work. So I always tend to look for something in that space. But I think overall distribution is like, it's now the name of the game, right? It's like the first question investors ask is, well, what's your acquisition cost? What are your channels of acquisition? What are you doing to, beat out your competitor for literally that same spot on the Instagram feed, right? And so it's basically, at the end of the day, it's a race to the bottom, unfortunately. But on top of that is where you have the advantage of owning your audience.
Yeah.
Erik, it'd be awesome to understand from like your perspective, you're investing in these companies and most of these people signed up for the podcast because your name's on it. So it'd be good to understand, like, maybe you don't have to name the name of the brand or the founder, but like what are a couple of the things in the D2C world you passed on and why, and what would have made it something that you didn't pass on? Or what are some of your D2C investments that you've made or e-commerce enablement investments you've made that you believe are going to, essentially help you return the fund, and why?
Well, it's interesting. We've been talking a lot about, content and commerce. And one thing that's sort of adjacent to that as well that I focus a lot on is communities and brands that really harness communities to create sort of moats or whether they. So one example of that is All Stripes. All Stripes used to be called RDMD, and it was founded by this person Ono who had a rare form of cancer. And what he did is he started gathering other people who also had this rare form of cancer. And because it's a rare form of cancer, they're underserved. The big companies don't make drugs for them or don't make high quality services for them, products for them. And so he started building this organic and authentic community of people who have a rare disease and then different rare diseases. And they started sharing data with each other and then the company so that they can get better products. And that's a really exciting example to me because it's a hard community to build, and it's once you get that data, you can serve that community better. And so we've invested recently in another company that's trying to do it in health as well for chronic illnesses for women called Superbloom. And I'm interested in other sort of communities and brands that if you once they get off the ground, they either get some data advantage or they just compound as a result of being a part of people's identity. And this is on deck, right? You're part of this is Y Combinator. You're part of the first cohort of something. There's status in being involved in the first cohort, and then you have additional cohorts, and thus the experience just gets more valuable as more people enter the network. So I'm interested in communities and brands that have network effects because as more people get better, the network gets stronger, and it becomes part of their identity in the way that On Deck has become some part of some people's identity on a much bigger scale in the way that CrossFit or SoulCycle or some of these other brands have become part of people's identity. But that's amplified. There's a relationship with the brand, and then there's a relationship with the people that also like the brand. And so that's a additional factor that I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. As someone who runs a media company, I talk a lot about the difference between community and fandom. I think media founders too often confuse the two. Neither are bad. They're both good, but they're different. They serve different purposes. So a lot of times when people say, oh, we have every media company says they have community. Very few do. Almost none do. Right? Community companies have communities. Media companies have, if they're lucky, fandom. Just because people comment on your Instagram post doesn't mean you have community. To me, it's hard to define. But to me, a media brand is more one-to-many, right? And people may love the CEO or the founder or the creator, but that doesn't mean it's community. Whereas community is more many-to-many, like what you've built with On Deck. Another quick story is I invested in a business called Soul Savvy, and it's a concept where they create communities of sneakerheads, and they do community in a really interesting way. They have cohorts. I think they keep the cohorts like 2,000 people at $300 or $400 a year. And they're doing really, really well. And to your point, what's interesting to think about is if they can create the go-to community for sneakerheads, yes, of course they can build a, 50 or $100 million ARR business and do the math. But it's like, well, what can they do with that, right? If they own the access to sneakerheads, it gets interesting. Think about like what's the potential. And so I really like that business a lot. And I love the idea of going in with community and then scaling into something else or monetizing it differently. I think the challenge there is community is tough to scale. So to make sure that you are either your LTV of your product, right, is high enough, like a Y Combinator venture that worked out pretty well, or you can get to that next step, that next thing fast enough where your community doesn't get diluted.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, it's interesting. First on the, I think you hit it exactly right. Communities are many to many, and content can be a great way to get a community off the ground. Because they rally around this individual person or brand, but you then have to create the next step of facilitating many to many, and other people go more. So you can either go tops down or bottoms up. But if you go tops down and you don't sort of pass the baton, so to speak, start to decentralize the relationships or control, it won't be many to many. It'll be fandom, and that works for many people. That's totally fine. But people should know exactly what that means.
One thing that I heard recently that I thought was super real was if you don't have a group of customers who would jump on Clubhouse to talk about your brand or your, whatever's new or updates or whatever you're launching, or even another good example is like if you don't have a Reddit community that has a very engaged and active, basically group of users that's always talking about updates or what's new or their concerns, their problems, things they like or dislike or want to see, then you don't have a community. You simply just have super fans or fans. And one of my favorite brands that I think show a great sign of community is probably like SoulCycle. If you go to any social platform, there's not only the social channels of a SoulCycle, but also, customer created groups, whether they be Facebook groups, chat rooms, Reddit communities, Clubhouse, meme users, like Instagram meme accounts. I mean, so many things, right? Like that to me is a great example of community.
A lot of people have thought, hey, let's build this product first, and then we'll just, sprinkle community on top of it. Whereas, in a world where, as we're talking about, distribution is the hardest thing now. It's harder to get distribution than it is to build the things. And that used to be reversed. In that world, community is the hard thing. And so you're seeing people do the opposite, which is build an audience first, build a community first. And then once you own that, think about what products you can build on top of it, all the while, maintaining or realizing that if you sort of lose your initial value prop, or you dilute the community by scaling too much without providing sufficient utility to justify the scale, you threaten the goose that lays the golden egg, so to speak.
Yeah. I always say the best time to build your audience was like 10 years ago. You know that quote about the tree, and the second best time is now.
Yeah, exactly.
What is going to be interesting is seeing if there's somebody who thinks they can help these companies that have a lot of these super fans turn them into somewhat of a community, because it requires a ton of time, a ton of, like on the street style coordination, marketing, communication, and understanding. But I think some of them can be done. If you build if you take a site like Morning Brew and you try to build a community around it, I think that's definitely something that could happen, to discuss the daily news or whatever it may be. But then there's also going to be the question of like, well, what % of users care in the first place, right? Like how many people want to just get their newsletter, finish their coffee, and get on with their day versus how many people want to read the newsletter and then, whether it's join a Clubhouse room to discuss it or, join a Reddit thread or whatever an app would be, to communicate with others and chat about it and feed off of that. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to see in the near future too.
Yeah. And I think the thing is you can be able to build community, but not want to, because it's a huge commitment, right? Like it's a big commitment. And if you don't do it right, you just waste the time and effort. And so we've talked a lot about it, and we do plan on building community, but not with 3 million people, right? We plan on thinking about what are the small niche communities where we can create a high a high dollar product and build community with those 100 or 200 or 500 people in cohorts, as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to try to build a community with 3 million people. It's for us, it's not, the juice isn't worth the squeeze, so to speak. It's not worth the effort there.
Yeah. Gearing towards the closing here, Austin, why don't you talk a little bit about the future of Morning Brew and just more broadly, what you hope to build in the next few years and beyond?
Yes. So I think we've done a really, really good job of creating a newsletter business. I think the next evolution for us, and we've started, but we're very early in the journey, is just becoming this media brand, but more importantly, just a brand that resonates with modern business leaders. When you think about business, whether it's reading the daily news, whether it's getting educated further and taking classes, whether it's learning about your industry, whether it's being entertained on social, whether it's learning about investing or productivity, I want to have products and services that cater towards our generation and the way our parents' generation, or at least my parents, viewed the Wall Street Journal. I want our generation to view Morning Brew as that go-to business, not just news source, but that business entity that you can identify with and just, go to for all of your business and business adjacent needs.
Nik, how about you? How do you think about the roles in which you might want to play and evolve?
We are looking to two things. Either one, acquire brands and scale them up as if they were brands that we work with, or two, pretty much what Austin said, like basically find an owned audience and launch brands based on data of what's selling, what's moving fast, and what has the greatest potential. And I mean, we've done so many brand launches over the last 2 years that we have a pretty good system to understand or identify where white spaces exist, and then also testing into those white spaces and making sure that they actually do exist, not just reading the data. So I'm really excited to see, either what we launch or what we acquire and then end up growing.
To the extent that you can share a little bit about what white space does exist, or what's your sort of request for startups or request for innovation in the space. Where would you like to see, people who are potentially building stuff, but, where would you like to partner with them?
Yeah, I mean, we do a really good job of taking brands that have gone, 0 to 1 or 1 to 10, and then helping them grow from there. So we're looking for brands at that stage that are just, they're tired or they don't know what to do in the next step. They don't want to take the next step. They want to get back to launching and building. And I've actually learned there's a ton of people who are serial launchers and builders, but they don't want to be the scalers. So that's probably the criteria. I mean, as far as like more specific, we're either looking at things that, that interact with you on a daily basis. So whether it's inside your home or outside your home, but mainly things that probably hit your daily routine in some way, your daily nutrition, your daily, your daily process of getting ready, like whatever it may be, something in your routine. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. And what are things that you either passed on, explicitly or sort of passively just have surprised you in the past couple or few years in this broader space that you didn't originally see?
There was, so there was like DTC 1.0, which was companies like Native and Movement Watches, right? Basically they figured out how to find the manufacturer, how to make a website, and then drive traffic there. And then D2C 2.0 was basically almost everybody and their mother understanding they could go to a contract manufacturer and pretty much do the same. So I think what surprised me most was probably at the beginning of that, when I would get, 5 decks from skincare brands, and they're actually all feeding off the same product, same ingredients, same manufacturer, with a different logo, put together by some branding firm, getting paid $250,000. And that to me was probably the funniest thing, and definitely something I passed on. But I think since then there's been a ton of innovation around, like, again, finding those moats. And I think at this point now, I really don't look at brands unless they have those kind of moats.
Give us some examples of 3.0 companies then.
Yeah. I mean, a great 3.0 company I would say is like Judy's an emergency kit brand that we launched last year. They have tremendous access when it comes to distribution, the founder being Simon Huck, and, spending well over a decade, I think, in the entertainment industry, knowing the ins and the outs, knowing everybody and their mother. So I think that's one great one. Black Wolf Nation, I think, is another great one, whether it's because of the cap table that they have with some of the prolific people there, down to the manufacturing abilities, the financial engineering abilities, and the fulfillment. And another one I would say is probably like Co-op Commerce. That's another one to me that I think is well on its way to be $1 billion company, simply because they found that white space, which is that post-purchase page, and found a way to make money off of it, and basically drive revenue and traffic and conversions and new customers for brands that maybe didn't have a shot when it came to Facebook and Instagram ads.
Yeah. And if Greg Eisenberg's sort of shorthand for white space was, go to, subreddits with certain amount of followers and see if you could build a community on top of them, what's the D2C shorthand or equivalent?
Honestly, there's a handful of Chrome plugins. You can go surf Amazon. You can go to brands that or marketplaces and just look at what's best selling, not available for, maybe they don't have their own brands, and build brands around them.
Awesome. Guys, it's been a great episode. Let's end with some plugs. Where for people who want to go deeper, where can they find you online and check out your work?
Yeah, I mostly hang out on Twitter. So you can find me at Austin_Rief, RIEF. I'm a few other places, but that's where I spend most of my time.
And check out Morning Brew.
Yes, absolutely. Morning Brew.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I'm also mostly on Twitter at Mr. Sharma. There's no underscore. SHARMA, or just nick.co. You can hang out on my site, and also my Twitter's there too.
My guests today have been Austin Rief and Nik Sharma. Austin, Nik, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.